Because of the pandemic, a lot of my book events got canceled, including here at Chik-Wauk for a little while. So it's really nice to be here today and see most of your faces. I like to start out with the idea of the living story of Chippewa City. Chippewa City was an off-reservation village outside of Grand Marais, and that's where my Drew-lard ancestors come from. And I started digging into the history of that place back in 1987 is when I did my first interview with George Morrison about Chippewa City, and worked on it as a college project where I interviewed a number of elders who remembered living there. And so that's most of the history in Walking Mule Road. And my cousin, Bob Swanson, gave this phrase to me. It's, everybody say it as Bimadzi Agazukan. You're speaking Ojibwe one. And that means that stories are living things, like rocks, water, trees, people, animals. And they keep changing. And so if you read the book, has anyone read the book? Oh, great. So thanks for being a part of the living story of Chippewa City. This other term, Bizendao, everybody say that. Bizendao. Now give it a pause. Bizendao is a verb, action word, that means to listen. And in a recent interview that Dr. Gordon Jourdain did for WTIP radio, he explained the full meaning of Bizendao, the act of listening. And it sort of blew my mind. It made a lot of sense to me, so I'm going to share it with you via Dr. Jourdain. For Anishinaabe people, everything is related to descriptions and actions. And so listening isn't a passive thing. It's very active. You're not just using your ears, but you're using your whole body, your whole group of sensibilities. And growing up with a dad who was a hunter and a fisherman, and hearing stories about my grandpa Fred, who actually worked here at Chik-Wauk in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I used to hear people say that Grandpa Fred, when you went out in the woods with him, he would be there, and then you turn around and he would be gone. And I think he was listening. He was fully in the woods. And so, just food for thought as we move ahead. I like to start with some words for the people. Most of you are probably familiar with a lot of these terms, but I do cover it pretty well, the differences and the story and history of the words for the people in the book. But I think it's good to start out like as that, at a base level of understanding. So Chippewa is actually a nonsense word. It's not an Anishinaabe word at all. But that is the name of the people that has come to be very common on treaties and things like that. Ojibwe is an old school version of Ojibwe. Ojibwe you'll see in a lot of like anthropological textbooks and things like that. And Ojibwe or Ojibwe is actually a Cree word. It's not Ojibwe either. And it means to pucker up like the puckered toe of a moccasin. Everybody say this, Anishinaabe. 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 Anishinaabe is the traditional word for the people known as Chippewa, Ojibwe, or Chippewa, Ojibwe, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. And you'll see that, I think, more and more. The sign at Grand Portage, when you enter the reservation, was changed to say Grand Portage Anishinaabe a few years ago now. So words change, like stories change, right? Now here's a tongue twister. Everybody try with me, okay? Seginaga. 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 Zaga igani. Seginaga. Zaga igani. So that's a great descriptive word, and it means twisting lake with many islands. 289 islands, to be exact. Maybe more now that there's a lot of So, speaking of words, the word for Chik-Wauk is actually derived from an Ojibwe word, Chik-Wauk. Everybody say that. Chik-Wauk. Guess what that means? Anybody? Who said that? A pine tree. Chik-Wauk. Okay. Next one. I'm not going to go through this really detailed, but I just wanted to give everyone an idea of the idea that, like, words and stories change, people move about, and the Ojibwe creation story goes through a series of migrations that brought the people to this area. And this map comes from a really great book, Going, which was put out by the Grand Portage Reservation. And it shows how the people came from the far east on the ocean and made their way via the waterways to Anishinaabe, which is here. Anishinaabe, this place. Okay, next slide, please. And again, I'm not going to go through all this, but I am going to tell a story about one of the notaries on this list. This covers, not comprehensively, but a lot of the high points of early Europeans who visited the Gunflint Trail area. And this is documented in Walking the Old Road as well as many other books. And I'll have a book list at the end too. But it gives you an idea of the timeline of European experience here on the Gunflint Trail, what we now call the Gunflint Trail. And so from the book, I'm going to read a passage about Alexander Henry, 1775, land survey expeditionist who was here after he had a bad experience across Lake Superior. So it's from a section called Words Are the Bones of Stories. Interestingly, an Englishman named Alexander Henry the Elder was nearly killed during Pontiac's uprising at Mackinac in 1763. His life was spared. Only the mercy of an Indian woman who hid him in an attic kept him alive while all the other white men were massacred in the yard below. After surviving Pontiac's rebellion, Henry traveled to the North Shore, scouting the area for business opportunities. Described as quote-unquote a Yankee from New Jersey, he left Grand Portage in 1775 and paddled inland along the border route. According to his journal, his men did not encounter any people living along the waterway until they reached Saginaw Lake, a 5 or 6 day journey from Grand Portage. They found what was left of a trading post located at the mouth of the Granite River. In his diary entry for July 20th, he reported that, and this is from his journal, which was reported by Bill Rath in Pioneers in the Wilderness. There was formerly a large village of the Chippewa here, now destroyed by the Nottawacies or the Dakota. I found only 3 lodges, filled with poor, dirty, and almost naked inhabitants, of whom I bought fish and wild rice, which latter they had in great abundance. When populous, this village used to be troublesome to the traders, obstructing their voyages and extorting liquor and other articles. So that's from Alexander Henry's journal. And so this isn't this in my voice. As a very early description of the Lake Superior Anishinaabe, it's vitally important to put Henry's perceptions about the people who were living at the mouth of the Granite River into the proper historical context. Because his words set the stage for all the other local historical accounts that would follow, including that of Peter Pond, a countryman of Henry's. Poor, in this case, is juxtaposed with Alexander Henry's experience as a relatively wealthy Englishman from New Jersey. Dirty could very definitely be construed as a prejudicial judgment based on his own preconceived ideas about cleanliness, which at that time were equated with religious devoutness and puritanical ideology. His observation about the people being almost naked, while shocking to Henry, might simply have been an indication of the weather that day. Anyone who's been fortunate enough to spend time on Saginaw Lake in late July can appreciate being in a state of almost naked and feeling well fed on deep water trout and wild rice. It's all a matter of perspective. And that really, I guess, sums up some of the reasons why I wrote Walking the Old Road. Because when I started digging into local history and the history of Chippewa City, I discovered that it was mostly written in the voice of non-native people who had their own ideas and history that they used to tell the story. And so I think next time you visit the mouth of the Granite River, perhaps you'll think about it a little differently. And of course, Anishinaabe Aki is not just the North Shore or the Gunflint Trail, but all points to Turtle Mountain in North Dakota. And at one time, what is now Quetico Provincial Park was a very big village of Anishinaabe people who lived at the center of what is now Quetico. And one of the leaders at the time, his name was Chief Blackstone II. There were two Blackstones. And I read a little bit about Blackstone in the book, and there's other information available about Chief Blackstone. But I found this photo. It was taken at Sandy Point in Ely. And Blackstone is the figure who is gunning the canoe, who has his back to us. And I wasn't able to find any other pictures of Chief Blackstone, but he very much, I think, is a notable leader in the Gunflint Trail area that is definitely worth exploring as we move forward. Okay, next one. On the left is a picture of Swamper Caribou, namesake of Swamper Lake. So if you've driven up the trail, you went right by Swamper Lake where he used to live. He was a trapper, part of the Caribou family. Caribou family is one of the, I think, notable names that you'll hear a lot when you dig into history, including Cooks, Powells, Blackjack, Mushkawash, and so to the right there is a picture of Akwaujik and Jack Powell. That's from Betty Powell Skoog's book, A Life in Two Worlds. And the Powells, I think, now because of the work of Chik-Wauk, a lot of people know more about the Powells than probably before. And I had the good fortune of growing up with Milt Powell, and who was a great family friend, and I was able to interview him quite a bit for Walking the Old Road and then some radio work that I've done. So next slide, please. This is a picture of Milt and family. He's the little baby in the front. He's wearing a white rabbit coat that his grandpa made for him. And this was taken on Sagamagons. The Powell family lived, well, at Sagamagons, but at other places too. And so I just wanted to share, let's see here. A little story from Milt Powell. He told this story about his dad's dog team that was used for trapping and moving about the lakes when they were frozen. He said, my father, when he was trapping, he snared a wolf, a female wolf, and she had 5 pups, and he drove the 5 pups as a dog team. He'd go from Saginaw to Gunflint nonstop. He was the only one who could go around them. Us kids were never allowed to go up and play with the work animals. We could feed them, but not play with them as pets. I asked him if it was because they were wild, and he said, if you played with them, they wouldn't behave like they were supposed to. Milt's father would be gone for 2 or 3 days and would usually come home with a sled full of furs. Then Milt said, when he was trapping, he would maybe get 50 to 60 beaver, and then he would get the same amount of mink and a few fisher and a few otter, and he got 1 wolverine. That was his winter kill. I asked Milt if he ever joined his dad on trapping trips, and he said, I was with him a couple times, but I froze out. And when I start getting cold, he'd have to shorten his trip, so that only happened about twice. After that, I'd stay home where it was warm. One of my favorite stories that isn't in the book, but you could find it at WTIP under Anishinaabe Way. Milt told me that around this time of year, maybe a little later in the year, the family would be getting ready for winter and all the preparations that have to be done to make it, through the very, very cold times. And he said they had a pet beaver named Annabelle. And while the family was screwing around trying to get firewood and things, the wind would start to blow, and he said Annabelle would go around and steal socks and shove them in cracks in the wall to keep the wind out. Yeah. Okay. One of the amazing things I think about where we live is our relationship to water and lakes and rivers. And I just read an interview with John Moran, who is a tribal council representative at Grand Portage and a leader in a number of ways. And he said that way back, the people would take the names of the water bodies that they were living on. That was the association that was made that made the most sense. And the people and the animals, of course, were all relying on the resources found in these lakes and rivers. And in the Ojibwe prophecies, which I'm not an expert in, but there's a lot of material out there, it explains how Anishinaabe people ended up here after the long journey from the east. And it has everything to do with the food that grows on water, which is
the Noman.
rice. Yeah. And to get out in the rice beds, you need a good boat. And to go fishing and feed your family, you need a darn good boat, which I think most people can probably relate to if you have any relationship with Saginaw. And so one of the larger points that I like to make is that maybe we wouldn't even be here if it weren't for the Anishinaabe presence here on the Gunflint Trail. In a lot of ways, our ancestors paved the way for the quality of life that we have now. And so, when I visit Saginaw, my family has a great history here, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but I just always think of the many, many people who have passed along the routes that we're all familiar with for 1,000 years or more. Especially like when you go around the Narrows, that pinch point that everybody has to go through. It's a historic road, really. And I love this road metaphor, I use it a lot. But it seems to make a lot of sense. And so I wanted to show these old pictures of canoe building. The photo on the right was actually in Grand Marais around Chippewa City at the turn of the century. And then guesses about where this photo was taken?
Right here? I would say right here. On Saginaw, on the
It is right about where North House is. So think about that tradition of boat building. Amazing. Okay, next slide, please. Part of the migratory nature of Anishinaabe people and other tribal people is that we've got to travel around based on the seasons, because that's where life gets easier and where you find resources. And this idea of a seasonal lifestyle isn't gone. The photo on the left is the cover photo from Walking the Old Road. It's my great aunt Kate Frost at Sugar Bush, which is above Crawford, closer to Grand Marais. And maple sugaring and the syruping tradition is another one of those things that I think we can give a nod to Anishinaabe people for. And in the book list at the end, there's a book by Brenda who taught me something new recently, which is that the work of wild ricing and sugaring was traditionally the work of women. And then that changed over time as gender roles changed and economies changed. So it makes a lot of sense that great aunt Kate is there leading the sugar bush. And then the other photo is of the Tebow family. And I don't know a lot about that photo or really about that family. I just thought it was a cool photo that seemed like it was really Gunflint Trail Lake. So, and I love the dog. Okay. So that's my grandpa Fred Drew-lard, and he is making shore lunch for clients here on Saginaw. And it is kind of amazing when you think about all that the workers did here at Chik-Wauk to keep everything going. Grandpa Fred was a fishing guide for many years, kind of a famous one. He made the paper a few times with giant lake trout. And my dad has said that back then, the fishing guy did it all. He would take out bigger groups of people, mostly here for a week at a time or more. He had clients that were doctors from Chicago who would come up every summer and request Freddie as their guide. And he would take them out and have all the lines ready and have the boat ready and have the bait ready, and he would bait the hooks and take them fishing. And they would catch the fish, and then he would stop somewhere on a beautiful scenic spot and cook shore lunch, so he'd clean the fish, cook the fish in bacon grease, make some potatoes, probably a can of beans, and then he'd have to clean it all up and bring them back. And if they didn't catch fish, like trout, everyone wanted trout, of course. But on these hot summer days, trout are kind of hard to come by. And so, if they didn't catch trout, he would take them slowly through the channel, which had walleyes and maybe northerns. And hopefully they would catch some walleye. And then he'd bring them back here and unload the boat, and they would go back to their cabins. And my grandma Lola was the cook in the kitchen. And she would prepare the fish at night for the clients. And so that photo really says a lot to me about the work that was done here and the great history. So it's wonderful to see that Chik-Wauk is restored and is being used for historical purposes and educational purposes. I think it's amazing. And then there's another way he made a living was to take people hunting. So he's there with a party of hunters. He's second one in from the right. And those are some gigantic deer. I don't know where those came from, but so the way of making a living on the Gunflint Trail, I think, is food for thought when you think about the history of people who built the place and everyone who worked here and the resort owners and just every fish on every plate. And this is a picture that came from my Aunt Gloria's photo collection, and it was taken right over there by the Chik-Wauk building. And it's Grandpa Fred and Hank Ignatia, Tempest Powell, and Irv Benson. And this was very much a hub back in the day. I'm guessing this was sometime in the 1940s. I don't have an exact date. But Chik-Wauk was and is a great meeting place. And so it's a place to share stories and keep the living story alive. And so as part of the living story, it's good to remember that listening with more than your ears and protecting the stories and remembering them so that you can share them is a really important thing. It keeps, I think, the story vibrant. Me, you, that's all I have for the slide presentation, but I can ask questions, or if there's photos you want to go back and look at. Yes?
When was Fred, you called him Freddie. I remember as a kid up here, he was 7 years old. When was he born and when did he die?
He was born in 1907, Chippewa City, the youngest of 12. And he passed away in the 1970s. I don't remember the exact date. I think I was 5, so 72. I didn't know Grandpa Fred very well because I'm one of the younger cousins of the Drew-lard clan, but my dad loves to tell the story of when he was an up-and-coming fishing guide himself. And he was here at Chik-Wauk. He was 16. And he said one of his jobs was to get the boat ready, gassed up, get all the lines ready, get the bait ready, so that his dad could take the clients out. And eventually, Dad got to know the lake really well. And it was decided that maybe he could take some fishermen out. And so he made little small trips, and then there was a bigger trip that was trickier. I believe it was into Northern Light Lake, which was a long trek for a 16-year-old fishing guide. And he took them out, and they had a fine day. And his dad let him go. And he said when he came out of the passageway from, I guess it would be Northern Light into Saginaw, his dad was in a boat, kind of hanging out. He had some fishermen with him, but he was pretending to not notice that dad was about to complete the trip. So, yeah.
No, that must have been after the war though, because I don't think Irv came up until after the war.
Okay. What do you think? What year do you think that was?
I don't know, wait, do you think that's a correct comment?
Yeah, because those are the guides for Chik-Wauk, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Irv was a guide too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought it was after the war that he came up.
Well, it could be.
Do you think that's right? I do.
So that would be like in 48, 49.
48, 49.
That's when a lot of people came up.
Yeah.
Wow.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
So 48, 49. Thanks for helping me date that photo.
I remember when your book first came out, there was a quote that I don't remember, but it was something about your grandfather walking on, Highway 61, and then some white people asked him what he was doing on the road, and he said, "What are you doing on my road?"
Yeah, that's a great story. That's my Uncle Charlie, Drew-lard, my grandpa's brother. And my aunties and my dad said that they loved Uncle Charlie. He was very, very colorful. And there's some stories about Charlie in Walking the Old Road as well. But the tale is that Charlie lived in Chippewa City, and he was in town on doing something, I don't know, shopping, visiting a tavern, he knows with Uncle Charlie. And the police stopped him, I guess, because he was walking down the middle of Highway 61 between Grand Marais and Chippewa City. And they said, "What on earth are you doing? Why are you walking in the middle of the road?" And he said, "I'm Charlie Drew-lard, and you built the road on my trail."
How much of the old road was
She said they're
part of this
up
one?
at the museum and nobody else is
The
in
old,
there.
there's a map in here that shows where the old road went. Mostly went along the lake, kind of where Old Shore Beach Road is now.
The Crossroad Road?
No, where the DNR building is.